Commissioner Fielder and Zach, can you hear me? This is Patricia.
This is Commissioner Fielder. I can hear you fine.
Thank you.
Similarly, thank you, Patricia.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Fielder, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. President, I can. Thank you.
Okay, Zach, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. President, I can.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Time is now 9:30 a.m. Today's date is March 8th, 2022, and is the time and place for our regularly scheduled business meeting. Would the other commissioners join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? Flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, nation under God, justice for all. Thank you, commissioners. I would note for the record that Commissioners O'Donnell, Pinochi, Johnson, and myself are present in the Bollinger Room. Commissioner Fielder is participating remotely, so we do have quorum this morning. Is there public comment this morning? Any public comment from the room? Seeing none. Any public comment online? Seeing none. All right, there are no changes to the agenda this morning, so we'll move right into our action items. We'll move for approval of the commission minutes for the week of February 28, 2022. Is there a motion? Is there? Okay. Commissioner Pinochi moved, seconded by Vice President Johnson. Discussion or changes to the minutes? Right, seeing none, all those in favor of Commissioner Pinochi's motion to adopt the minutes for February 28, 2022, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, motion carries unanimously. All right, let's move into our work session. Work session item number 1 is commission initiated. This is Wireline Competition Bureau's public notice of request for comment on telephone number conservation CC docket number 99-200. We're here to have the commission to discuss the possibility of filing comments in response to Wireline Competition Bureau's request for comment on a waiver to forestall the exhaust date of the single area codes used in Maine and North Dakota. We're here to discuss having the commission file comments that could request that Montana's 406 area code be included within the waiver to forestall its forecast exhaust date. Good morning, Mr. Dalton.
Good morning, Mr. President, and good morning, Commission. My apologies for the lengthy title of this work session, but this work session has been called so the Commission can discuss an opportunity to file comments in response to a request for comment that was issued by the FCC on February 9th, 2022. Specifically, the FCC seeks comment on whether or not it should issue a waiver of its rules in order to forestall the exhaustion of the singular area codes in Maine and North Dakota, while the North American Numbering Council studies the technical feasibility of individual telephone number pooling, also known as ITN pooling. The singular area codes in Maine and North Dakota are projected to be exhausted in 2025 and 2026 respectively. The singular 406 area code in Montana is projected to be exhausted shortly after, in the third quarter of 2027. Staff recommends the commission issue comments in response to the FCC request that address 3 main points. 1, the FCC should issue the waiver in question for Maine and North Dakota. 2, the FCC should include Montana in said waiver. And 3, the FCC should investigate all potential options to prolong numbering resources in the United States. This includes, but is not limited to, ITN pooling. Staff has circulated a memorandum to the Commission to give you further background on this matter, as well as provide you with a set of draft comments that the Commission could issue in response to the FCC's request, if the Commission would indeed like to file comments in this matter. Mr. President, that concludes my introduction, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Is there a motion? Commissioner O'Donnell?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I wish to move that to allow staff on behalf of the commission to write a letter to the FCC asking for a waiver to include Montana in their actions.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second the motion, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Discussion, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. I think it was educational to me in discussions with Mr. Dalton yesterday as to why Montana was left off of this very short list. And he indicated, I think there's a 5-year window before exhaustion, and Montana just barely is over that 5-year thing on there. So we're asking them to not just include us because it's important to Montana, but we're asking them to sort of waive their operating rules to do it. And so we don't have a very strong standing on the whole thing, but we're talking 5.5 years from now that it's projected, the 406 is projected to be exhausted in Montana. And because it is so absolutely really essential to keep Montana completely as 406. This is not our last opportunity, but if we can be given the exception right now, I am awaiting direction, comments from former PSC Commissioner Travis Kavula, who was in the past few years chairman of the North American Numbering Association, I guess it is. And so it should have some keen insights on how to go about this. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm very, very happy that we can do this for the people of Montana.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. Additional discussion?
Mr. President,
Commissioner Fielder?
thank you. I just want to be clear on the motion is, Commissioner O'Donnell, is the motion to approve the comments that staff prepared and included in our packet today?
No, the letter might include some of that, but the motion is simply to draft a letter asking for a waiver.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
Mr. Dalton, just a question I think that will elucidate for the public what we're tackling here. It's my understanding the 406 area code is forecast to be exhausted by the third quarter of 2027. Is that correct?
Mr. President, yes, that's the current forecast exhaust date.
You note in your excellent memo, by the way, that only 37% of the numbers for the 406 area code are actually in use, correct?
Mr. President, yes, that is correct.
So can you give like a 2-minute summation for the public as to why we're facing a closure of the 406 or area code, but only 37% of the numbers are actually in use?
Mr. President, yes, I can certainly give that a try. Probably one of the main reasons, which is discussed in the memo, is the fact that numbering resources are assigned to carriers in blocks of 1,000 contiguous numbers. So 442 000 through 442 999, for example, is a block of numbers that a carrier might receive, whether or not they need that full 1,000 number block. So for example, if a carrier only needs 200 numbers, it makes that 200 number request to NAMPA, and NAMPA in return assigns a block of 1,000 numbers to the carrier. So
Excuse me, Mr. Dalton, NAMPA is the North
NAMPA
American.
stands for the North American Numbering Pool Administrator. So essentially that remaining 800 numbers is left with the carrier and unavailable to be used by another carrier for those customers, for their customers. And this process leads to a large amount of numbers going unused and a premature a premature exhaust date for the 406 area code.
So to build on that, an example that Commissioner O'Donnell and I were discussing this morning is for our friends in Flaxville, Montana. And if you know where that is, congratulations. They would be assigned 1,000 block of numbers for the Flaxville area, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Mr. President, yes, that is correct.
And so ergo, if you don't have a population of 1,000 folks in a particular town, then those numbers go unused, correct?
Excuse me, Mr. President, yes, that is correct. And actually, to take it one step further, in a town like Flaxville, it's not just the 1,000 number block that is assigned to that particular area. In order for that 1,000 number block to be assigned, an NXX code needs to be opened to serve that area. And an NXX code includes all 10 1,000 number blocks that would make up an NX code. An NX code is, for example, 406-442. So that 406-442 is opened up for a place like Flaxville. A 1,000 number block is assigned to the providing carrier, and that full NXX code is assigned to that rate center and can't be moved to another area in Montana. And then on top of that, the providing carrier may only need 200 of that 1,000 number block that was assigned to it. And that type of process leads to a large amount of wasted numbers, Mr. President.
Artfully explained. Thank you. I'll comment. I'm going to support Commissioner O'Donnell's motion. I believe that it's imperative that this commission weigh in asking the 406 area code to be included within the waiver to forestall its forecast exhaust date. And the reason that is in part is because the 406 number has become part of Montana's identity. Most of us who reside in Montana identify and associate with the 406 area code. It's become a source of pride for those of us that live in Montana. And it's also become a marketing tool for a number of businesses here. And so I think it's prudent and in the public interest for us to weigh in on this matter. Vice President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too will support the motion. I think perhaps though, we should check with the folks in Flaxville and make sure they're okay with no longer having 1,000 phone numbers each.
We apologize to the people in Flaxville for picking their community this morning. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to point out also one of the significant things in Mr. Dalton's memo is that the FCC recognizes and prioritizes the retaining of area codes because of their geographical and identity to an area. So we're not just running uphill on this whole thing, is that this would be a request that is consistent with their own priorities. And I think that's a very healthy sign that we might prevail on this. Thank you.
Mr. Dalton.
Mr. President, I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but just to clarify on the motion. So the commission would not like to file comments in response to the FCC's request for comment, but instead write a letter to the FCC. Is that what I understand?
I'll ask Commissioner O'Donnell to clarify, but it was my understanding that we are authorizing staff to provide commission comment. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Well, the purpose of my understanding of the process here is that we would comment on it to support our request that we be given added to that short list of extensions on there. So we would be giving some justification, some reasoning for doing that, but not commenting on the entire matter as it is. Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Fielder.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I'm still a little bit confused. Staff has prepared a comment for the commission to submit. And Commissioner O'Donnell, your motion does not include submitting this comment, but instead just submitting one element of it regarding the request for inclusion in the delay.
Yes, Commissioner Fielder. The memo, I think, was designed to give us background information the FCC is very aware of. They understand all this. The only purpose that we are doing is that we need to get our comments in so that we can take advantage of an administrative possibility, the extension that or adding us to that list so that we would be able to be included in that exemption. It is simply a procedural thing at this point.
Mr. President, I believe that what I'm seeing in our packet is a formal comment prepared by staff for the commission to submit, and I would like to support authorizing staff to submit the comment that's before us, it's been prepared. So unless Commissioner O'Donnell has an alternative document for us to adopt, I don't know what exactly we're voting on, unless it's this comment before the Federal Communications Commission that's been drafted in a legal manner for us to submit. And yes, it does have some background information, but it's footnoted and it provides substance behind the request, which I think is important when you submit comments to the Federal Register.
It's an excellent point, Commissioner Field. I think I need some clarification from Commissioner O'Donnell. So is your motion authorizing the commission to move forward with the draft prepared comments that are in your packet at this point in time?
Not necessarily. The motion is to ask the FCC for the waiver, for the staff to come up with a letter. If they conclude that this proposed letter right here is sufficient for that purpose, that's perfectly fine with me. I don't really care what the exact content is, as long as it accomplishes the purpose, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I will move to amend the motion to direct staff to submit on behalf of the commission the comments that were presented to us in the staff memo with the understanding that, what do we say, edits that are not substantial in nature can be made at the discretion of the staff, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Is there a second?
I would second that motion, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Fielder. All right, discussion on the motion to amend, Commissioner O'Donnell.
I just want to say that's perfectly acceptable to me. I have no problem with that.
All right, so do you accept that as a friendly amendment?
Absolutely.
All right. So that is now the motion on the floor is accepted as a friendly amendment. Discussion on the amended motion.
Mr. President,
Commissioner Fielder.
I appreciate that we're accomplishing the objectives of the original movement. So we're not doing anything opposed. And I appreciate the work that Commissioner O'Donnell's put into this too, in unearthing additional details or seeking to unearth additional details. And I commend our staff for doing an excellent job in presenting this and preparing these comments for us. Thank you.
Additional discussion? All right, all those in favor of the amended motion by Vice President Johnson signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Sultan. All right, let's move to work session item number 2. This is docket 2021.09.113, Montana Dakota Utilities. Montana Dakota Utilities Company is asking for authority to implement a gas cost tracking adjustment charge. We're here to act on the hearing examiner's proposed final order. Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. President and Commissioners. As just mentioned by the President, this was a docket that was referred to a hearing examiner appointed by ALSB, that's Agency Legal Services Bureau. This was the first docket that the Commission has referred to Agency Legal Services Bureau for processing as a hearing examiner docket. On February 15th, the hearing examiner issued the proposed final order. By commission rule, the parties have 20 days to file exceptions to that proposed final order. The 20 days elapsed yesterday. At this point, there have been no exceptions filed with the commission. So the matter is not only uncontested as a hearing examiner process, it's also uncontested as a matter of the proposed final order. The question now for the commission is whether or not to approve this proposed final order. Staff has reviewed it, finds no problems with the proposed final order, and therefore recommends that the commission approve the proposed final order. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Mr. Hamilton, is there a motion? Nochi?
Thank you, Mr. President. I make a motion to support staff recommendations to approve.
Second.
All right, Commissioner Pinoche has moved and that has been seconded by Commissioner O'Donnell. Discussion. Just have a procedural question, really not substantive, I suppose. So this matter was referred by the commission to a hearing examiner. Sort of like to talk about timeframes as to whether our decision to refer this to a hearing examiner resulted in a time-saving benefit to the commission, or so what I'm asking you is can you sort of walk through procedurally the timing on this and whether it was congruent with us acting internally on this matter in lieu?
Certainly, Mr. President. Commissioners, the procedural history outlined in page 1 of the proposed final order sort of walks through the general timeline here. So you'll note the application was filed early September of last year. It proceeded through the procedural history that's outlined here. The commission did approve an interim order before referring this out to the hearing examiner. So that allowed MDU as a practical matter to begin collecting the rate that it was that it believed was appropriate, and that the commission, if the motion today is adopted, agrees is appropriate. So as a practical matter, did it prejudice anyone in the process here to have the timeline laid out before you take place? Not necessarily, because it was subject to an interim order. But to speak to your question, Mr. President, I do think that this took slightly longer than normal for a docket of this nature, especially in light of the commission's decision to allow staff through a delegation of authority to resolve uncontested matters. Dockets like this could proceed through a final conclusion without involving, for example, the proposed final order and 20 days for exceptions, which we would of course have to allow under the hearing examiner process. So did it make things quicker? I don't believe that that's correct. At the same time, was anyone prejudiced? I also believe that's not true.
I asked that question, Mr. Hamilton, because as you know, our friend Representative Zolnikov, the former Representative Zolnikov, not the current Representative Zolnikov, passed House Bill 597 in the 2019 session that authorized the hearing examiner process here at the commission. And I think, if I may speak on behalf of Representative Zolnikov, his theory is that creating the hearing examiner process before the PSC would expedite matters that appear before us. It's been my experience on the last 14 months that that is not necessarily the case. So my thinking is that perhaps the commission should advocate for legislation during the 2023 session, either modifying or asking that the hearing examiner process be well amended or taken away. Additional discussion? I'm going to support the motion. I don't see any. Our job essentially, as I understand it, Mr. Hamilton, as the commission today, is basically to determine if there are any conclusions of law that are erroneous from the hearing examiner. I think we are to give deference, correct, to the findings of fact of the hearing examiner.
Mr. President, that's correct. You can modify the findings if they're not supported by record evidence, but at this stage, based on staff's review, all the findings are supported.
Okay. And I see no error in the conclusions of law, and so I believe this hearing examiner's order is supportable, so I will support. Additional discussion? All right, all those in favor of Commissioner Pinocchi's motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Seeing no opposition, motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. All right, let's move to work session item number 3. This is commission initiated. We're here in accordance with the Blue Book policy to provide the public an update on the commissioner travel and how the same benefited the agency. We're here to have commissioners who have traveled provide an update to the public on the purpose of the commissioner's travel conformance, as I noted, with the agency's Blue Book policy, and the House same benefited the agency. Vice President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Recently, I did attend the annual winter meeting of NARUC, the National Association of Regulated Utility Commissioners, and wish, Mr. President, that I could tell you that there were lots of final decisions being made nationally with regard to regulatory policy. However, in many of those instances, those discussions are hurtling forward at what is truly a glacial pace. And we spent far more time at this meeting discussing, frankly, Mr. President, what we don't know for sure going forward than what we discussed for sure. I think if we looked at the two areas where I spent most of my time, first, water. I am the commission's representative on the Water Committee. We continue to see the prospect of a substantial amount of federal money being poured into that arena, especially in the area of dealing with what they call PFOAs, chemicals that are finding their way into groundwater sources. Not sure exactly what they're going to do with all that money that's going to be directed at dealing with PFOAs, but it has become a real lightning rod in the water area. And I think if we acknowledge the fact that regulatory policy has become increasingly complex and increasingly regional and national in scope, the benefit for Montana clearly comes with the ability and the opportunity to interact with both regulatory and industry people from around the region in the country as we try and assess what those challenges are going to look like going forward. I am guessing by the time we get to the summer meeting, Mr. President, there's going to be some additional clarity in terms of when and how that funding is going to be in fact allocated and released. But it's sitting here today. We simply don't know for sure what Montana is going to receive in that regard. The same concept can be applied while I was not in the meetings in terms of resulting from some kind of ex officio conversations with the broadband money that's coming out of some of the federal legislation over the last year and a half. We would anticipate a substantial infusion of capital there as well. I would guess the commission will have limited jurisdiction over the specific use of those funds. And then finally, Mr. President, and perhaps most important to us going forward, the question of where we're going to go with transmission in the electricity transmission in the Western region. There continues to be, frankly, a real lack of cohesiveness on the part of state regulators and industry people as to what that should look like. There had been some real effort put forward to try and create kind of a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach to Western regional transmission. That does not appear to be getting a tremendous amount of traction. And there's talk now from individuals involved in those discussions that we, in fact, should perhaps go to the other end of the spectrum, if you will, and start dealing with smaller groupings of states, for example, going to Montana and Wyoming and saying, okay, you two states looking forward, what are, in order of importance, the 5 biggest challenges you see for your states with regard to transmission in the West, and see if you looked at each of those identified issues as a circle, see if there are overlapping circles there that a smaller number of states, in fact, could cooperate on to kind of eat the elephant one bite at a time instead of trying to swallow it whole. Again, Mr. President, I wish I could say, boy, we just hammered out all these specific solutions to all these problems, but they're issues that are very much on the front burner that are going to be important to all of us, but the progress is certainly slower in terms of resolution than any of us would like, but I think it is incredibly important for the people of Montana that this commission continue to be at the table for those discussions, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Let me comment on that or add to it is that a great amount of the discussion is at NARIC meetings. This one in particular have to do with larger metropolitan areas and the issues that they face and the states that are really big onto renewable energy sources and the demise of fossil fuels and the rise of EVs and ESG and things of that nature, things which have yet to really materialize in Montana, talking about community grids of solar in large cities and significant electrified vehicle penetrations. There's an awful lot of the discussion that focused on that. And it also indicated that a lot of these different agencies and states have major problems on coming up with ways to spend massive amounts of money that they never imagined that they would have before. And they're being very diligent on coming up with new and novel ways to spend deficit money.
Additional comment or travel?
Recently, last week, I traveled to Cheyenne, Wyoming to have an opportunity to meet with one of the, what I consider to be one of the world's most significant and prominent climate experts. Although even people who are really well versed in this area really would say that climate is such a very difficult area that no one can really claim to be an expert on this. The reason that I went is to talk to him about what he feels is the prospect for resource adequacy in Montana, which is the most prominent concern of mine, and the approaches of a Western regional transmission organization to share power within the region to solve regional needs. I think it seems to me is woefully insufficient, and that puts Montana citizens at very great risk and peril of not having enough power to sustain life at minus 45 degrees, which I think will happen again. So Mr. Tony Heller has yet to give me a sufficient answers to my questions. He's doing research and compiling information on these, but I think this will be very useful in guiding my own opinions and comments and initiatives, and hopefully share those with the commission, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. Commissioner Panochi.
Thank you, Mr. President. Travel in the past month has taken me to Lewistown, where I spoke, Circle, Montana, Glendive, Montana, Sydney, Montana, Scobie, Montana, Malta, Montana, Havre, Montana, and Loma, Montana, and then back to Great Falls. Traveled over probably 2,000 miles. Issues that came up, which were very concerning to the public, is a 3-judge panel is debating how they're going to change the PSC district. So I explained that by handing out articles showing that is taking place, which we're hoping to hear this week. One of the big topics was energy efficiency and how we opened a docket here at the Public Service Commission to encourage energy efficiency, to try to play a role model lead concerning mostly power lines. And that was received very well. We had samples of power lines and hundreds of articles, which we've passed out, showing that Northwestern Energy has played a leading role in the Monarch power lines and the savings of $440,000 a year. Most of these talks were given at Lincoln Reagan Day dinners. And I recently reached out to the Montana Democrat Party explaining that energy efficiency is certainly a bipartisan issue, and asked if they could set up some meetings for me to attend to get them up to speed that they may have around the state. Their executive director is looking into that and promises me that she'll get back to me on that. Some other issues that came up is the spike in natural gas. We're directing phone calls to our department where Tina is getting some of those calls. Some other issues that came up was railroad safety, which is very confusing because we only handle parts of railroad safety. Like we can inspect a car or an engine, but for instance, we don't regulate anything with railroad crossings. And we've recently had a couple of deaths where there was no crossing lights. My advice in giving these talks to educate the public is they can reach out to their legislators and have us be given further responsibility, but that's something that has to happen at the legislature. And I think this is good interaction to work with the public so they have a better understanding what we do. And if they'd like us to see a greater role, they reach out to their legislature to do that. These cost of these trips I covered on my own. The Public Service Commission will not be covering any of those costs. And I have been invited back to 3 locations to talk again, and then I will do so. I'm anxious to hear from the Democrat Party if there is some work we can do. I've also encouraged them to consider legislation that would possibly give a greater role to the Public Service Commission, especially in high efficiency. This efficiency docket to encourage energy efficiency, I think opens up to many things and many possibilities from both sides of the aisle, and I'm hoping to have some results. Also next month, I will have to travel 3 times. I'll be in Lewistown again to be working on bear-proof dumpsters. I will be going to Nayrook in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I have a hearing in in Sydney, Montana, MDU hearing. So that kind of covers what I did this last month and what I plan to do next month. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Commissioner Panochi. Commissioner Fielder. Commissioner Fielder. All right, well, we're waiting for Commissioner. Oh.
I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Go ahead.
Forgot to hit the unmute button. Sorry. Mr. President, yes, since giving our last travel report, which I believe for me included the 5-day hearing in Missoula for the L&L Site Services Class D license application, my official travel since then has been limited to just in-state travel between my district and our Helena office to address internal matters of special focus, including the organizational rule revision that we adopted last month, work with the Blue Book Committee and individual staff members who are helping with Blue Book policy revisions, the in-person visit with our Ready project manager, who was here over that week of President's Day. We didn't have official commission meetings early in the week, but I was here because I was here in Helena, I should say, because he had planned to be here to meet with us. And that was a very productive field visit for our project manager who came up from Texas to meet with us that week. And then also just a little bit of work on revising or revisiting our strategic planning goals heading into this time when we have to be providing budget updates and budget projections and budget requests for our next biennial budget to the legislature. So I'm trying to get a little bit ahead of that by conferring with commissioners and some of our management staff. So that's the extent of my official travel since our last report.
Thank you, Commissioner Fielder. In February, I attended the NARUC conference virtually. The registration amount was $475. I serve on the Committee on Gas. Each of us serves on a committee of NARUC, and my responsibility is Committee on Gas. The focus of the discussion for that committee was on states implementing clean energy standards, And in turn, the Biden administration recently issuing an executive order to procure 100% of the federal government's electricity from carbon-free sources by 2030. The discussion of the committee mainly focused on paths to reach that 100% goal, which all parties from whatever state or whatever political party agreed would be a substantial challenge to meet. And this is because 60% of the nation's electricity is currently generated by natural gas and coal. So 8 years out from the 2030 carbon-free goal, we're still 60% funded by natural gas and coal. Discussions focused on enabling state actions while ensuring reliability, ensuring the transition to carbon-free energy sources do not negatively impact affordability for consumers. Further discussion focused on how state and federal clean energy targets can address the potential costs, consumer impacts, and reliability repercussions nationally, as well as the states over the next decade. There was also significant discussion as to whether that was or sufficient research or guidance to state regulators on regional plans. And then there was discussion about the role technology can play in meeting the 2030 standards, such as low carbon fuels, carbon capture, microgrids, and demand response. The general session, I watched part of that. Covered the Department of Energy's Earthshots initiative, featured overviews from DOE officials Emily Grubert, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Carbon Management, Deputy Assistant Secretary Michael Pessin, who deals on advanced grid research and development, and then the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Kelly Backman, who's with the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. That session was facilitated by Commissioner Ann Rendell of the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission. Some facts that I gleaned from that, which I think the public will find of great interest. Between 1990 and 2020, natural gas system methane emissions in the U.S. decreased by 15.4%, quote, largely due to decreases in emissions from distribution, transmission, and storage. Gas distribution systems have lowered methane emissions by 70%. And these reductions were achieved despite a 60.5% increase in domestic natural gas consumption. There was also a general session that highlighted implication for states, the federal infrastructure bill, which the Vice President touched on. Main speaker there was Department of Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. And Ms. Granholm stated that $62 billion allocated to upgrade the power grid represents the biggest, quote, biggest influx of funding in DOA's history, which will allow the federal agency to provide diverse and cheaper sources of energy that are more reliable. And then she also emphasized the important role of state regulators during, quote, this critical moment of history. I think we're seeing that play out with national and world events right now. I also took a trip to Bozeman in January 5th. The cost of that trip was $61.91. It was literally probably the single worst weather day of the year that I drove on, and it was white knuckle driving the whole way. That's always a good time in Montana, but I made it. I toured Northwestern Energy's Bozeman division. We had planned some outside tours, but it was minus 16 degrees on that day, so we canceled that. The tour consisted of a physical tour of the Bozeman office, as well as a 2-hour discussion on Northwest Energy's Bozeman operations. It was really quite informative and well worth doing. One highlight of that conversation was a discussion on Bozeman Solar Pilot. And the Bozeman Solar Project is a partnership with the City of Bozeman, Montana State University, and Northwestern Energy. It's located on approximately 2.1 acres of land, and it's a solar project that is designed to provide renewable energy to power about 60 homes. The project is being used to evaluate long-term sustainable models for the integration of renewable energy while providing the City of Bozeman with data to better understand how they can meet their community climate action plan. Last summer, as you recall, I reported that I met with the City of Bozeman to talk about their climate action plan. So it was nice to see the confluence between this project and what the city of Bozeman is trying to accomplish. One of the more interesting aspects of that discussion was the challenges being presented by the tremendous population growth in Gallatin County, of which we're all aware. An aspect of that growth that I hadn't considered, but that came up during the discussion was the fact that growth in Gallatin County might be limited by the fact that the demand on Bozeman's water supply is exceeding the capacity to provide water, which is an interesting thing to keep an eye on. I also met with MSU President Waded Cruzado. If you haven't met President Cruzado, she is an outstanding Montanan and very highly of President Cruzado. We discussed the university's power needs and goals and what, if any, initiatives MSU is doing collaboratively with the city of Bozeman, namely in the area of climate change. It was a great conversation and I enjoyed the sit down with President of MSU. That is my report. All right. Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I apologize. I just, one other quick item. I have the privilege of sitting on the board of directors for NARUC, and as recently as 6 months ago, I had reported to some of you that the association was facing some significant financial challenges. The board and the staff have been working diligently both at realigning certain priorities within budget, streamlining staff, and trying to generate additional revenues. And actually, the reports in terms of the financial health of the association were extremely encouraging this time. They really have turned the corner, and I think we're going to be able to avoid some things like any kind of substantial dues increase to members and that kind of thing. And I raise that only because I really believe that the association is a tremendous asset to regulators, and the fact that they have kind of turned the corner in terms of financial health is good news for those of us that utilize that asset, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. All right, let's move to work session item number 4. This is commission initiated. This is litigation strategy update. We're going to meet to discuss next steps regarding pending litigation for the agency. The next portion of the meeting will be closed to the public. I'd note for the record that the presiding officer of any meeting, which is me in this case, may close the meeting during the time discussion relates to a matter of litigation and or litigation strategy, and the presiding officer determines the need to protect the agency litigation decision-making and discussion exceeds the interests of public disclosure. I have made that determination for the closed portion of our meeting. The discussion in this closed session will involve discussions and decision-making related to ongoing litigation in which the agency is involved as a party. Accordingly, as the presiding officer of the meeting, I am closing this portion of the meeting to the public. I would note for the record that upon the conclusion of the closed session, we'll adjourn the business meeting for today. And for public knowledge, our next commission business meeting will be Tuesday, March 15th, 2022 at 9:30 a.m. Okay, thank you.